Hi, everybody. This is Ms. Fennell, and we're here today to show you two videos. You're going to be watching two videos for us today. You're on Ed Puzzle already, I believe, and so I am going to just do what I hope is a pretty quick. Where should I put myself here? Oh, can't cover the duckling. Gotta have that. I'll cover the mushroom here. All right. We're hoping is a very quick introductory video to our last topic of Chapter 1. This will be our last topic for Chapter 1, and then after today, we're going to be getting ready for our first test, and we'll have our first official test actually next week. So we'll let you know the day that that's going to happen depending on your group. All right. So the big thing that we are getting into here today is called characteristics of life. And to this year, we are studying life science. We're studying biology and living things. All right. So the big question, and this is kind of gets interesting here. What is biology? Biology is the study of life. The word bio means life, and ology means the study of. So biology is what we're learning this year. It's the kind of science that we're doing this year, and it's called the study of life. All right. So if we're studying life this year, kind of begs a pretty good question. And that question is, what is life? What makes something a living thing? All right. Make my window a little smaller here. And in one sense, that's kind of an easy question. If I went over to the kindergarten classrooms and I asked the kindergartners, hey, kindergartners, look at these two things. We got rocks here and we got bobcats over here. Which one is alive? I think they'd look at me a little crazy and they'll go, duh, lady, the rocks are dead or not living and the bobcat is living, right? I think for most easy examples, you can it seems like a really easy question at the beginning. You know, obviously, living things are very different than non-living things. And throughout human history, humans used to think that living things were completely made out of different stuff than non-living things. Like rocks must really be made of something different than bobcats, you know? Or I always use in class, I use the example, you and your desk. You know, obviously you're alive, your desk is not. What makes living things alive? When we start actually digging into that question, it's actually a really complicated question. As we start learning more and more about living things and how living things work, one of the incredible things is when we look at what living things are made out of, when we look at these rocks, and we look at the bobcat, when we look at you, when we look at your desk, it turns out all of this living and non-living stuff is all matter. And last year you learned that matter is made of atoms, right? So it turns out you're made of atoms. It turns out your desk is made of atoms. It turns out the rocks are made of atoms. And it turns out the bobcat is made of atoms. I don't know if I'm going to be pointing the right direction when this actually plays for you. All of these things are made of atoms. And it turns out like you and your desk, you're mostly made of carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms, and so is your desk. So why are you alive and your desk isn't? Take a minute and just think about that. Maybe even pause the video. Can you give me some reasons why you think you're alive and the desk isn't? Or can you give me some reasons why rocks are alive and the bobcat isn't? All right. Scientists have been looking into this for a long time. And the answer that scientists have come up with this question is that everything that's alive meets what we call the 7 characteristics of life. What a lot of kids will say is that, well, the bobcat can move and the rocks can't. Well, it turns out not all living things can move. And so that's actually, you know, plants, they do kind of wiggle back and forth, but there turns out there are some traits that living things have in common. It also turns out the scientists are still arguing about this one. While we've solved it for the most part, there's some weird things like, for example, viruses that we're not really sure if they're alive or not according to our current definition of life and what life is. So the things that we want you to know about this is, number one, living things and non-living things are made of the same stuff. We're all made of atoms. So we want you to know that living things and non-living things are both made of atoms. We also want you to know that in order to be alive, you have to meet all of the 7 characteristics of life. All right. For right now, I'm going to really quickly go through with you what those 7 characteristics are. Here's the thing, though. Essentially, this is introducing you to the whole rest of our course. We're going to spend the whole rest of the year looking at these 7 characteristics and going into them in even more detail. Okay, so for example, in what is life? The first thing is all living things get and use energy. And we're going to be talking about this in our ecology chapter. Some living things make their own food, some eat plants, some eat animals, but all living things have to get energy. And I'm going to just go ahead and say energy is kind of the definition of life. Living things use energy. And when you stop using energy as a living thing, that's our definition of death. So living things that die are no longer using energy, right? My 10th grade biology teacher always told us, you're a walking, talking chemical reaction. Everything you do, everything any living thing do is a result of all these chemical reactions happening in your cells. And you need energy to keep things going as a living thing. So all living things use energy. Now, are there non-living things that use energy? Certainly. Your car needs energy in order to run, but your car is not living. And your car is not living because it doesn't meet all of these characteristics of life. So there are non-living things that might meet one or two of these characteristics, or maybe even three or four. But in order to be considered living, it has to meet all of them. So it has to get and use energy some way. Another characteristic of living things is living things have this really cool ability to make more of themselves. We're going to do a whole chapter this year that is about genetics and how living things can make more of themselves. Some living things can just divide in half, and that's how they make more of themselves. We're going to learn about sexual reproduction, which simply means two-parent reproduction. And we're going to learn how the genes go together there. And so that will be an entire chapter that we do this year. But living things can make more of themselves. Living things can respond to their environment. Living things respond to a stimulus. A stimulus is a change in the environment, and the response is the organism's reaction to that change. I'm going to share this slideshow with you. You can watch this video. There's a sensitive plant. It's actually a plant where you touch the plant and the leaves close up. Plants will respond to light. The stimulus is the light, and the plants will actually bend toward the light. If you set your hand on a hot burner, hopefully you'll pull your hand away. The hot burner is the stimulus. Your response is pulling it away. All living things can respond to some kind of a stimulus. They might not respond to every stimulus, but they will detect change in their environment and be able to respond to it. So we'll be talking about this more throughout many of our chapters. All living things contain DNA. DNA, you don't have to know this right now, but it stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. We're going to do a whole chapter on DNA this year. All living things have it. So that's another characteristic of life. C is for cells. All living things are made of cells. There's different kinds of cells. There's different cell parts. They work in different ways. We're going to do a whole chapter about cells this year. So all living things are made of cells. All living things will maintain what we call homeostasis. They try to do stable conditions inside the body. So we're going to get into this more when we talk about our systems chapter and how all the body systems and living things work together. But they're trying to keep internal conditions stable. If internal conditions get unstable, then the living thing is just going to kind of go kaput, and it's not going to work anymore. It's not going to use energy anymore. And that's the cellular definition of death, when the things quit working and kind of get out of balance inside the cell. As a species, living things tend to change over time. And so we're going to have a whole chapter about how DNA changes, and DNA changes every time it's copied, and therefore the living thing has to change. So it's kind of related to our DNA chapter, but living things have to change. Living things grow and develop throughout their lifetime. They can either get bigger or go through life processes and life changes. So these are the characteristics of life. And in order to be considered alive, so the reason why the bobcat is alive is because it meets all of these 7 characteristics. Once again, for right now, you don't have to memorize the 7 characteristics because we're going to be explaining more about them throughout the year. You just need to know there are 7. And in order to be alive, a living thing has to meet all 7 characteristics of life. All right. So what is life? That's really what we're going to be exploring the whole rest of this year. And here's just a brief introduction to it. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day.